All right, guys, I need y'all to get out your Birchbark House book. You're going to turn to page 5, and we are going to read chapter 1 today. We are going to read it together, and I'm going to pause every so often and let you guys work because as you're reading, you are going to fill out slide 5. So if you guys will come to slide 5, this is what you're going to fill out as we read. So every so often, I will pause and I will give you a second to fill this out. So the first time that I read this last year, I was kind of confused because of all the different characters. So what I have here is a character list. These are the main characters that you need to know about. And as we're reading, I would like for you to add details of who each character is to our character chart. I'm going to do a Machias with you in the beginning just to kind of model how I want this done. So every so often, I will say pause, which means that I need either one of you or the sub, whatever the sub decides. Or if you're at home, then you're going to pause the video whenever I say pause, and whenever you're done taking your notes from that section, then you'll hit play again. Okay. Here we go. Page 5, chapter 1, the Birchbark House. And if you turn backwards a page, we see that we are in Neben, which is what season? It is summer. And one more thing I need to show you before we read is if you flip to the very back of the book, there on page 241, it's a glossary and pronunciation guide for Ojibwa terms. So anytime you see a word that you know is not English, it's Ojibwa, which is the language they spoke, and they use some of their words pretty often. You'll get to know what some of them mean without looking them up. So anytime you see one of those words, you can turn to the back real quick. The words are in alphabetical order, and you can look and see what they mean. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Page 5. She was named Omachias, or Little Frog, because her first step was a hop. She grew into a nimble young girl of 7 winters, a thoughtful girl with shining brown eyes and a wide grin, only missing her 2 top front teeth. She touched her upper lip. She still wasn't used to those teeth gone, and was impatient for new grown-up teeth to complete her smile. Just like her namesake, Omachias now stared long at the silky patch of bog before she gathered herself and jumped. One hummock. Safety. Omachias sprang wide again. This time she landed on the very tip top of a pointed old stump. She balanced there, looking all around. The lagoon water moved in sparkling crescents. Okay, I'm going to pause there and I'm going to model this one so you can type with me on slide 5. What I learned was about the person Omachias, and it told us her nickname, which was what? Little Frog. So I'm going to put my page number. This is all from page 5, and I'm going to put a dash. And I'm going to take notes on everything that I learned about Omachias on this page that's important. And I'm not writing it in complete sentences. I'm not doing direct text evidence. But I see that on page 5 that Omachias she's called Little Frog. And I'm going to do a semicolon, which means that there's more coming. And I'll read later on that she's called Little Frog because she likes to hop around. I see that it says that she was 7 winters, which is another way of saying, do you guys know? So 7 winters means that she was 7 years old. So I'm going to type that. It says that she was missing her front teeth. That's not too important. She's got brown eyes. It says she's thoughtful. That's a good character trait to add. Just looking for the most important things. And I think that's about it for page 5. So let's turn to page 6. Okay, we've got some new characters coming in. I want you guys to take notes on these yourself. Thick swales of swamp grass rippled. Mud turtles napped in the sun. The world was so calm that Omachias could hear herself blink. Only the sweet call of a solitary, white-throated sparrow pierced the cool of the woods beyond. All of a sudden, Grandma yelled, "I found it!" Startled, Omachias slipped and spun her arms and wheels. She teetered, but somehow kept her balance. 2 big skipping humps, another leap, and she was on dry land. She stepped over spongy leaves and moss into the woods where the sparrows sang nesting songs and delicate relays. "Where are you?" Nokomis yelled again. "I found the tree." "I'm coming," Omachias called back to her grandmother. It was spring. Time to cut the birch bark. Okay, now I want you to add, I see who her grandmother is. So I want you to add that to your chart next. Who is her grandmother? All right, we're at the bottom of 6. All winter long, Omakai's family lived in a cabin of sweet scented cedar at the edge of the village in La Pointe, on an island in Lake Superior that her people called, I'm going to try my best, y'all. Her people called Moning Wanang Kaning, Island of the Golden Breasted Woodpecker. As soon as the earth warmed, the birchbark house always took shape under Nokomis's sweet hands. So here I've drug over a picture, a map, so I can show you where Lake Superior is. So here we are in Louisiana. And if you look up all the way to the northern part of our country, you have Lake Superior, which obviously flows into the country of, do y'all know what's above us? Canada. All right, let's keep reading. We're at the top of 7. Now the dappled light of tiny new leaves moved on Grandma's beautiful, softly lined face. In one hand, she waved her sharp knife, taken from the beaded pouch on her hip. In the other hand, she held tobacco. Nokomis was ready to make an offering to the spirits, or Manitou. They loved tobacco. Omachias banged the tree her grandmother had found. Okay, I'm going to pause right there because you should be learning more about Grandma. And her name is what? Nokomis. So I'm going to pause and I want you to type what you know about her grandmother so far. Okay, we are on 7 at the top middle. Yeah, here it is. This one. Omakais was skinny, wiry, and tough for 7 winters. She slammed the trunk of the birch with a big rotten stick. Splinters of soft wood flew. Boony, Nokomis scolded. Leave it alone. She walked up to the tree and put her leathery paw like hands on the smooth bark, feeling for flaws. Yes, she decided, her eyes sparkling at her granddaughter. A good one. Is it ready? Get, said Nokomis. Surely. Nokomis's tobacco pouch was decorated with blue and white beads in the shape of a pipe. She had owned the tobacco bag ever since Omakai's could remember. When she talked to the Manitou, Nokomis dipped out a pinch of tobacco. Old sister, she said to the birchbark tree, we need your skin for our shelter. Okay, if there's anything else you need to add about Nokomis or Omachias from 7, go ahead and do that now. Okay, we're at the top of 8. At the base of the tree, Nokomis left her offering, sweet and fragrant. Then she peered closely, deciding just where to make the first cut. Suddenly, she pressed her razor-sharp knife into the bark. Omakaya stepped back. Light filtered golden and green onto their faces. Tiny white flowers poked out of dead leaves. There were still traces of grainy old snowbanks in the shadiest spots, but in the places the sun was actually hot. Pow! As soon as Grandma made the proper cuts, the birch bark, filled with spring water, nearly burst from the tree. Machias helped her grandmother carefully push the bark aside. Then the two peeled it away strip by strip. She and Omachias carried the light, papery, pink brown rolls out of the woods, down a trail to the special place near the water. Here they set up the birch bark house. Damp ground made Nokomis's old bones ache, so she spread out her brown cattail mat and sat down there to sew those pieces of bark together. Okay, if you look up at the board real quick, you can see an example of what a cattail mat looks like. So they're taking the bark off of the trees, and we know they're making their shelter out of it, the birch bark house, obviously. So here, this is not Nokomis, of course, but this is an example of what a cattail mat looks like. You see how they weave it together, kind of like a fabric almost. Okay, we're at the top of 9. Omakais helped her, threading her tough basswood strands through holes punched by Grandma's awl. Meanwhile, Mama and Omakas's older sister tied together a frame of bent willow poles. Finally, as the light faded, they fastened the mats of bark onto the willow frame, a half skeleton of pliable saplings. The bark mats overlapped like shingles to shed the rain. Each one was secured to the next, so as not to blow off in a storm. When the house was swept out, smoothed, fussily arranged, and admired, they moved in. I'm going to pause right there. I have one more picture to show you. Okay, so if you look over here on the right-hand side, it's the text said Mama and Micaiah's older sister tied together a frame of bent willow poles. So willow is a type of tree. So here's the frame that they made for the house, so you can see what shape it's going to be. And then they covered the frame with these mats, and they were like shingles. And so if you look up, here are some pictures of some birch bark houses. Pretty cool. So if you look inside, you can see they're legitimate houses. Okay. So let's keep reading, and now we're going to focus on our characters again. So we're going to stay on this character slide. In that section, we learned that she has a mama and she has an older sister. We don't know, well, we see mama's name on the chart, but we don't know who older sister is. All right, here we go. The children, Omakai's brother, Little Pinch, baby Newo, Omakai's older sister, Pretty Angeline, and Omakais herself spread their blankets around the stone fire pit. Mama and Nokomis hung the smoky, woven bags of rice and tools and medicines from the willow poles above. I'm going to pause, and I want you to add to your chart because we just got some new characters. So I need you to tell me who Little Pinch is and who Angeline is. All right, let's keep reading. We're on 9 at the bottom. Omakas's family were Anishinabeg, and this was their island. Her father, her Day, was in the fur trade business, which meant that he was often gone, paddling the great canoes for the fur company, or sometimes trapping animals himself. Yellow Kettle, her mother, was quick-tempered, but always laughing, and her eyes shrewdly took in the world. Yellow Kettle was a strong-looking woman and beautiful. Her smile was generous, page 10, enigmatic, slightly crooked, and kind. She missed nothing when it came to her children. It was impossible to have a half-done job, ridiculous to even think of sneaking away in the morning before gathering wood for the fire and water for her cooking pot. And if Mama didn't notice the younger children's whereabouts, Omakai's older sister, Angeline, surely would. Now we're going to pause again. I want you to go back to 9, and you have learned who Day is. You've learned about her mother. You need to add those character traits. You learned something about her sister as well. So I want you to pause this and add those character details to your chart. Okay, we're on 10 at the second paragraph. Angeline was smart and so pretty, people turned in their tracks to stare at her. Her hair was thick, her hands clever. The beads in her designs were laid down in strict rows. Her stitches never faltered. Her steps, when she walked or danced, were clear and graceful. She was so perfect that Omakaias despaired. Still, she hoped that she herself would turn out like Angeline, and was sometimes embarrassed to find herself following at Angeline's heels like a puppy. Most of the time, Angeline was kind to Omakaias and let her tag along and admire from a distance. But there were also times her words were sharp as bee stings, and at those times, Omakaias shed tears her sister would never knew or probably even cared about. For as very beautiful people sometimes are, Angeline could be just a little cold-hearted at times. So I want you to go add character traits for Angeline and Omakaias. Don't forget to add your page number, and you're not copying and pasting all those words. We're taking notes. So you're copying down important details. Okay, we are at the bottom of 10. Omakai's little brother Pinch was the only really big problem in her life. The sad truth was, and she couldn't tell this to a single person, Machias didn't like Little Pinch. She thought there was something wrong with him. So greedy, so loud. But although his ways were mischievous and bold, Pinch loved his mother deeply, and he clung to her side. In fact, he took all her attention, even more than the baby. He clutched Mama's skirts with fat, tough little fingers. He yelled at Omachias if she was slow in giving up her willow doll, her little rock people, or anything else for that matter, including food, special pieces of driftwood she found, even her favorite sleeping place near Grandma. He thought he deserved everything. All right, we want you to pause the video and describe Little Pinch. Okay, we are at the bottom of 11. At least when it came to Nero, there was nothing to complain about. He was so sweet that Omachias often pretended that he was her very own baby. Of course, she hardly ever got to hold him, for he was still very young. Still, she was sure he preferred her to Angeline, and certainly to Pinch. Sometimes he even held his arms out to her when Mama was holding him, and yelled with delight when Omachias picked him up. All right, pause this. Give me a description of baby Nero. All right, turn the page. We're at the top of 12. As it grew, the family ate McCooks of moose stew and fresh greens and berries, licked their fingers and bowls clean, and at last rolled themselves into warm, fluffy rabbit skin blankets that still smelled of the cedary smoke of their winter cabin. I'm going to pause. I saw the word McCook and it didn't tell me what a McCook was. So if you turn back to your glossary on page 241 and you look for the M's and you find the word McCook, Makuk, it'll tell you what a McCook is. So it says a container of birch bark folded and often stitched together with basswood fiber. Ojibwe people use these containers today, especially for traditional feasts. So these are basically containers that they were eating out of. Back to page 12. They were glad to be close to fire, sleeping on soft grassy earth under leafy sky, and best of all, near water. They fell asleep to the peaceful, curious, continual lapping sound of waves. The fresh wind across the big lake blew away the smoke of cooking fires and vanquished the mosquitoes that came out in whining droves and had plagued them in town. It was good to sleep where the village dogs didn't bark all night, and where the only sound to disturb their dreams was the pine trees' sifting wind and a lulling roar. Unless, of course, it stormed. The moon went down to a fingernail's sliver, and the corn popped from the ground. The leaves of the birch grew big enough to flutter in the wind. And then one night, the first storm of the summer struck the island and startled everybody from their dreams. The fire was down to red, winking eyes when Amachias woke with an uneasy feeling. Something approached. She'd felt a footstep. Amachias was always the one to sleep near Grandma, and now she rolled close. There was a lonely insistence to the sound of the wind, and then everything went still. Far off, she heard one huge footstep. There was a long silence. Then another step fell. The earth shook slightly beneath her, vibrated as though she lay on the head of a vast drum. A drum! She remembered that Grandma had said the island was the drum of the thunder beings. Closer and closer they came, shaking earth with their footsteps. Omachias's lonely feeling became fright. She hid her face and tried not to think of balls of witch fire or the hooting of Grandfather Owl. She tried to keep herself from picturing pacooks, the skeletons of little children, flying through the woods, or the icy breath of giant wendigos striding over the ground, cracking trees off with every foot crunch. Another step, another, and another fell, and then the wind howled to life. Rain slashed against the tightly sewn walls. A breath of air stirred up the slumbering coals and cast shadows leaping and fighting on the inside of walls of the little birch bark house. Okay, I want you to start thinking about Omachias and her character. What kind of characteristics does she have? The willow poles trembled, bouncing with the force of the gusts of wind. The birch bark scraped and flapped, but was held on with tight stitches. Omachias hit her face as thunder rolled, smacking onto the lake shore. Page 14. Waking everything and everyone with its quick violence. The storm punished the ground and then passed over, dying off in softer mumbles. The dull thuds of thunder falling in the distance now felt comforting, and before the sounds entirely faded, Omachias was asleep. Okay, I want you to pause this, go back and look through. How would you describe Omachias as she faces this situation? Add that to your log. Okay, let's keep reading. We're on 14 under the divider. Moaning Wanekaning, island of the gold-breasted woodpecker, sparkled innocently after that night of raw thunder and lightning. Omachias woke and immediately began wondering, what had the storm done to the trees? What had the waves washed onto the beach? What interesting bits of wood that she could use for pretend dolls? What kinds of day would it be? Were the little berries on the edge of the path ripe yet? An unpleasant piece of wondering came to her, too. Had her mother finished scraping and tanning that ugly moose hide, or would she have to help her? Oh, she hoped not. How she hoped! There was a saying she hated. Grandma said it all too often. Each animal, she would say, has just enough brains to tan its own hide. Hey, Miss Gracie, you did good on the announcements this morning, by the way.
Thank you. You look fabulous.
Thank you, Gracie. Mama tanned the moose hide with the very brains of the moose, and Omachias hated the oozy feel of them on her hands. Not to mention the boring, endless scraping and rubbing that went into making a hide soft enough for moccasins. So if you look up at the screen, I've got a picture of what tanned hide looks like. Some of my hunters, y'all might have done this before. So the Anishinaabe, they really, like the Plains Indians, they both used every part of the animal. So if you notice, the text said that they cleaned the hide or tanned it with the brains of the animal, which you know how disgusting that would be. And then they said they used the hide to make moccasins. Do y'all know what moccasins are? They're like these little shoes. We would use them as like house shoes today. These are traditional ones that I found that the Ojibwe might have worn. These have the maple leaves. Remember, they're up in Canada where they have the maple trees. So they used every part of the hide in order to survive. That's how Native Americans roll. Okay, let's go to our chart, and I'm going to give you, I want you to pause again and see what you can add about Omachias. We definitely learned about her character on page 14. So remember to put the page number and tell me, what have you learned about Omachias' character trait? All right, let's go to the top of 15. From a fire in the center of the bark house, a thin curl of smoke rose, then vanished through a crescent of sunlight in the roof. If only she could escape with the smoke. She could already hear Grandma and Mama. Sorry, y'all. She could already hear Mama and Grandma outside at the cooking fires. They were planning the day's work. In no time at all, that soaking moose hide would be stretched on a branch frame, and she would be required to scrape at it with a sharpened deer's shoulder bone that her mother kept in a bundle of useful things near the door. Her arms would tire. They would feel like falling off. Her fingers would go numb. Her back would hurt. The awful smell would get into her skin. And meanwhile, all the little birds would find the luscious patch of berries she alone knew about. By the time she got that stupid old moose hide softened up, they would have eaten every last berry. She must act quickly. The air was fresh, delicious, smelling of new leaves in the woods, just popped out mushrooms, the pelts of young deer. The air flowed in, rain-washed, under the strips of birch bark walls she had helped sew together yesterday. like a small striped snake, like a salamander, or squirrel maybe, or a raccoon. Something quick, little, harmless, and desperate. She slid, crept, wiggled underneath the sides of the summer house. The seam of bark, turn to 16, caught her in the small of her back, stuck tight. If only she hadn't done such a good job of sewing it up. If only, too, Angeline didn't have such quick ears and sure knowledge of her whereabouts at all times. There was a firm pressure suddenly at the small of her back, still caught on the inside. Her sister's foot, her sister's gloating voice. Neshiname, baby sister, little frog, don't go jumping off. Okay, go look real quick at the glossary in the back and find what Neshiname means. So Neshiname means what? Little brother or sister. All right, we're at 16 in the middle. Then there was her mother, rounding the back of the house, one side of her hair still flowing down, unbraided. She glanced in surprise at Omachias, trapped, and then, unable to hide her amusement, a big grin spread over Mama's face. Her admired big sister, her beloved mother, laughing. There was Omachias, laughter from the front and laughter from behind, and suddenly all of last night's thunder in heart. Machias sat near the cooking fire and slowly, with deep inner fury, ate a bowl of cold stew. She dragged out time waiting for her hateful job to start. Mama was wrestling that hide out of the stream now, where it had been soaking for days and nights, gathering up its scummy, woolly slime. Mama had already set up the dreaded frame of branches, and there were strings of hide nearby that she would use to tie the skin up tight so that it could be worked. Oh, Machias knew how important it was to tan the skin, how her mother would cut up the soft, smoked hide and sew on the winter's moccasins all summer. She pictured her mother finishing them with lovely soft toe puckers so the girl's feet could twitch and dance. She could imagine Yellow Kettle beating them, lining them inside with the silkiest rabbit fur and pieces of an old wool blanket. Yes, it was an important task, but Omachia still didn't want it. She finished her stew, cleaned the bowl with the sand at the shore of the lake, and waited with a sigh for her mother to ask her to fetch the dear bone scraper. Let's pause, and we've learned something about who? Machias and her mama. So go take notes on their character right now. Remember, sometimes we have to make inferences. We can't just go based off of what the book says. We need to make almost like an educated guess based off of what the author says. So if the author says that Amachias hated tanning the hide, someone who doesn't like to work, you might call them what? So you need to make sure that lazy is on Amachias' list of characteristics, okay? All right, let's go back to 17. Her mother said something else, though. I need my scissors. Omachias sat up, suddenly full of energy. Omachias' mother was well known for owning a pair of scissors, and other women were always borrowing them. Omachias' first job ever since she could walk was to fetch her mother's scissors, kept safe from her small fingers in a beaded woolen case, and bring them home. She had never failed, for it was a job she liked, not only because she was sometimes given a handful of monamin, rice, or a little chunk of maple sugar, turn the page, by the borrowing lady, but because there were things to see on the way there and back. Right now, her sister Angeline was digging at the ground near spruce trees and cutting lengths of the roots, used to secure the house better and to finish baskets. She was cheerful, humming at her work, glad to have gotten the better of Omachias. She'd show Angeline. Let her work until her hands fell off. Omachias had a fun job, too. Go fetch me the scissors from old Tallow, said Omachias' mother. without a moment's hesitation, before Mama changed her mind and remembered about the help she needed with the stinky hide, Amachias ran off. All right, so that is the end of our reading. You need about 1 more minute to finish up your chart. Make sure you didn't miss anything. And then in about 1 minute, I would like for you to share your chart with someone at your table and see if there's something that your table has that you don't have. See if you can improve anything. Have a conversation, and your sub needs to time you for about 3 or 4 minutes for y'all to discuss that chart and then move on to the next step of the lesson. Okay.